Welcome to another episode. Today we're doing an app layer focused episode. And with me, I have some really cool builders who are building at the forefront of the UI. So why don't we start with like some quick introductions and also like your projects. What are you guys building?
Sure, I can go first. Being referred to as a builder is probably aggressive in my view. I'm Egor. I sit on the leadership team at Infinix, responsible for treasury, commercials, basically any time that Infinix platform touches money outside of user funds comes through me and my team. As a quick overview, someone referred to Infinix as the everything app, which I quite liked. We sit right in between an exchange and a wallet. The front end is a centralized, fantastic user experience that people are used to and actually quite need. The back end is completely decentralized. It means that user funds are always going to be safe. You deposit into Infinix, you get access to swapping, to bridging, to airdrops, soon to be other DeFi primitives, soon to be on and off ramps, soon to be mobile apps, soon to be any asset, any chain.
Oh, yeah, I can go next. My name is Tabasco. My real name is Ethan. I don't have a title at Particle. My title used to be, I used to tell people I'm head of developer relations, but
Chief Yapper.
That is a
Chief
yeah,
Yapper is
yeah.
better.
Yeah.
I don't do any
Head of
developer
DevRel.
relations.
That's
This
a
was-
new one.
Yeah, this was what I used to officially do, like manage developer relations. But I do mostly Twitter posting all day, and this is
Good.
And so
That's actually more useful. Yeah, I think that's
it's been pretty useful for
works.
us. It's like, yeah, it's our
Yes.
main mechanism of marketing is the fact that I'm addicted to that like notification on Twitter. So I just post constantly. But basically what we do at Particle is we do chain abstraction. So we are very big advocates of the chain abstracted user experience. So, our tagline for one of our sub products is never bridge again. And I'm not anti-bridges, but I don't like the fact that users have to manually bridge. And so our whole company is based around fixing that problem and making it such that as a user, I can go and I can use, application A on chain A and B on, chain B. And I don't even know that those like application A and B are on different chains. I just know that like I have my balance and I'm using these apps and there's no distinction between the chain that these apps are built on. Same thing goes to like a chain abstracted app, right? So we specifically build our own app as like our proof of chain abstraction called Universal X, which is like a trading app. Basically, it's kind of like a centralized exchange, but on-chain app that you can use to trade tokens on Solana or any EVM chain. And that app is basically you deposit on any chain and then you can go and start trading. But the important thing is that it's with a collective balance. So if I deposit like ETH on Arbiter and Base and Ethereum, that balance that I have, that ETH balance is tradable, is a collective across those three chains, which I can then go and use to buy a token on Solana if I want to. And so that's the type of experience that we are trying to make kind of standard across the ecosystem. And that's what I've been shilling for over a year now. So
guess what? People want to buy Ethereum and they have USDC on Arbitrum. Who cares? They have USDC somewhere and they want to buy Ethereum.
Would you think that is the unlock because of the deposit and withdrawal function? Because like it's kind of like now all the money I intended for this app or the system, I've moved there, and hence I don't care. Versus I'm using my EOA that has funds in 35 wallets and I can control a smart contract wallet, but you don't have the deposit withdrawal. So it would be more important like what money is used in a way.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, this is why when we look at L2s that are like crazy incentivizing TVL, it's incredibly mercenary. Like no one cares. No one cares. You deposit, you collect your balance, and then you move on to the next thing. That's why you obfuscate away from which chain are you actually on. There's a difference between good chains and bad chains. Fair enough. You don't want your assets on a chain that is not producing blocks or a chain that is underfunded or a chain that is not completely decentralized. But the difference between Optimism, Arbitrum, and even Base, USDC is ubiquitous amongst all of them. Does it matter which pile of cash you draw down from? No. At the end of the day, the user just wants a click button and buy my thing, or collect my thing, or do one action. Does it matter where it came from? Probably not.
Gotcha. So I'm Marko. I run the team at Jumper. We've started solving chain abstraction about 2 years ago, just in a bit of different direction. So we're a bridge index aggregator, and we allow users to basically make their own choice of the routes and assets or routing and indexes and bridges that they're going to go through. And we still see this as a predominant factor, at least for our user base, which does want to be able to farm or use specific protocols from security speed perspective or whatever it is. So we're not as opinionated into like how the UX for the user should be. It's more, any wallet, any bridge, any DEX, make your choice. So Google Flights basically for crypto.
Yeah.
Like, I want to know, how do you guys think about building moats in crypto? Because the underlying infra is pretty commoditized, right? Like, everyone can access the same infrastructure. But then at the end of the day, you guys have to go out and acquire users through some pitch, right? So how do you all separately think about building a moat for your app? Like, what's Infinix's moat?
User experience.
Okay.
So for us, we want to provide the most seamless user experience that you can get. The user experience that you're used to with Google or with Binance or with Coinbase, you click a few buttons and actually it's all done for you. You know it's in a relatively safe environment, or you think that you know it's in a relatively safe environment until SBF steals all your money. But that's why FTX was so successful, because they gave you everything you wanted in one platform and one login. You logged in, you deposited, you had sub accounts, you could do whatever you want. There was tons of liquidity. There was perps, there was spot. There was
launches.
Token launches. There was he ran this insanely good discount for trading if you held FTX. Like obviously Alameda front ran you in all the trades, but like it was
a good user experience.
It was pretty good. Yeah. Like the user experience was really good, execution terrible, but you get to have real competitive advantage if users don't have to think about what they have to do. They don't have to think about what bridge they have to use. They don't have to think about which wallet they're going to plug in. They just want to do the action. Yeah. Stake my stuff and earn interest. Just do the thing.
I think, first the question would be, the UX improvements are also going to get commoditized like pretty fast. So how?
Yeah, for sure.
Like from a longevity perspective, it doesn't sound like a strong moat in a way, right?
So you're absolutely right. The user experience right now is a moat because no one else is really doing it well. But then there'll be a uniform experience. Like the difference between Binance and Coinbase, like what is the user experience difference? Not very much, right? It's then everything else after that. It's how do you do your on and off ramps? How do you do card payments? How do you do your airdrop campaigns?
Basically pieces of the system that kind of create the soft vendor lock-in.
You need a base layer,
Right.
and the base layer for a decentralized architecture platform, and I'd love to hear your opinion, the base layer is quite low right now. So you first need a base, you establish that base, and what's that? You want to do the basic fundamentals really, really well.
Yeah.
After you do the basic fundamentals really well, you can start getting fruity, like special orders on chain. You
Yeah,
can
value-added services basically
exactly,
on top.
Yeah,
right.
exactly. But you for us, we don't build infrastructure.
Yeah.
We plug into infrastructure. Like we don't touch it at all. We never touch user funds. It never routes through anything that Infinix has actually deployed. It's just a front end, and the front end is completely centralized. And the beautiful thing about that is we can go away, we can fold, we can shut down, but your funds are always yours and your funds are always safe. And that's the real competitive advantage, is we offer you recovery where you wouldn't get recovery in a traditional sense.
No.
With Binance, you become a creditor. With Coinbase, the same thing. With FTX, you become a creditor. Luckily, 1 out of the 10 exchanges that failed paid you your actual money back.
As a user, so I'm familiar, I've used Infinix a little bit, but like from a feature set perspective, why would I go to Infinix? Like I know that you guys kind of compare yourself to Binance and Coinbase, these things. So am I going there to speculate, or you said the everything app? What's the extent of the feature set there? Like why? Like what's the pitch to a user? Why would I want to use Infinix?
Yeah. So think about it. Like I'll take a step back. If we're in a scenario where like right now there are not users that are falling out of the sky. In the previous cycle, you get to a stage in the market where new entrants are coming out of everywhere. Right now, we're saturated right now. It's the same crypto user that has always been the same crypto user. Most people have onboarded. We are servicing them in a way that they potentially have never really had access to, and that's like deploy all your assets and you get a bunch of benefits. We pay for the gas on swapping, we pay for the gas on bridging, we give you a connected interface that it gives you all of the homework. We route through all of the routers and give you the cheapest and the fastest one for your route, right? That's one segment. The segment that of the new user that we haven't seen yet is your cousin Steve, who comes to you and says, Ethan, you've been telling me about this Bitcoin thing for forever, and I've done some YouTube research, and I'm finally ready to buy Cardano. Where do I go to do that? And in reality, a year ago, you'd have to say, right, first you buy a ledger, right? You buy a ledger, and then you get this kind of metal plaque. And then the metal plaque, you stamp words into it, and then you find a hole in the garden, right? And make sure no one sees you in that hole. Like, it's ridiculous. You're going to say, okay, Steve, just go to Binance, right? Go to Coinbase, whatever, Kraken. There really hasn't been a meaningful competitor to challenge the status quo. When users fall out of the sky, Steve won't know why Infinix is better than Binance, but you will. and you will say, actually, there's a much better version for you. You just go there because you can get every single thing that you could possibly want and more. You don't not only get the points campaigns and the incentive programs, you get access to DeFi, which you can't do from the centralized exchange. You get access to a completely different set of features that while you want to do your spot Cardano buy, you can do that on Infinix and everything else. And it's still self-custodial.
I hope my cousin isn't buying Cardano.
Someone buying Cardano. Find me who that person is because it's still a top 10 asset.
It seems for me we're actually all building the same thing end state wise. Like for me,
Yeah,
maybe
it's
this
just
is
different
kind of a
approach,
segue into the chain. Like for me, chain abstraction is Revolut, basically. I don't know if you've used it. It's
Yep,
the
I love
European
Revolut.
fintech app, right? So you can send money, IBANs, any bank account within the app,
Yeah.
buy crypto, buy stocks, have savings accounts, set up different ways of like when you spend the money, the strategy of like how much you're going to save, where that money is going to go. You can get flights, where ATMs are, get I don't know, hotels, whatever it is, right? Insurance, eSIM cards, whatever. And it's basically a touch point for your personal finances. Like everything that your finances touch, this allows you to like simply do. And like that, for me, this is the end state of chain abstraction and probably the apps that we're all building just through different design choices. Like you are dog fooding it and you're probably not going to be able to win most of the native users, but like when new users come in, you're well prepared. For
Yep.
example, for us, it's like catering to the current user, right? The user that's actually like flowing through chains, figuring out protocols,
Yeah.
which one doesn't have an airdrop, stuff like that. For you guys, very similar to Infinix, I would presume. Like on a spectrum, if we move it, like would it be more on that side?
I think we started off there. I think we've been trying to move more towards, especially a certain subsector of existing users. Like, really when we started Universal X, that was actually pretty, like in terms of the UI UX, it was actually pretty similar to Jumper and Uniswap and
Yeah.
different things. But we changed it pretty radically over the past few months because we want to target like people on Photon and GMGN. So like these very high frequency traders or even new traders with very high volume that are trading 7 figures a week. We want them to use Universal X and particularly use it for the moat of taking advantage of opportunities on chains without needing to bridge. Because as a trader, one of the like loss of potential capital gain is the fact that, okay, like BNB chain, right? It wasn't as much in the US, but it grew a lot, especially in terms of trading over the past few months. And as a trader, I have all my capital on Solana and a little bit on like Arbitrum and Base. Now I want to go start trading on BNB chain. Okay, I can go manually bridge all that stuff over, but there's a token right now that I want to buy, and that's why they have some amount of assets in Universal X because they can go and do that, just like they would if Binance were to list it, but they don't need to wait for listings or anything like that. But you mentioned an interesting thing. You said that we're all building the same thing, and this is like Revolut is what you think chain abstraction should be. If you were to give chain abstraction a one-line definition, and maybe I'm putting you on the spot, but just like a simple definition of like how, like what is chain abstraction, what is not chain abstraction, what is the scope of chain abstraction? How would you define
Okay,
that?
so I don't think I can do it in a one-liner. One-liner would be Fugazi at this point.
Yeah.
So for me, chain abstraction is much more on the infra level. Like the future, the meme, the prophecy of billions of users or whatever does not happen with an app being cool or funny, right? It happens by the neighbor not even knowing he's using blockchain rails. Like that's the chain abstraction part. And it comes from an infra level, and it most probably will be dog-fooded through current like, Web 2.5 or like fintech TradFi companies that is the true scale it can reach, right? What we're talking about in the context of our industry is like UX cosmetics, basically. So the topic that I said Interop is solved, you can build super cool stuff like that are like seamless and stuff like that, but it's still the users can only expand as the industry expands, and no one app, no one UX improvement, even though it's 10x better, is not going to be the one that's like, okay, we have this influx or whatever. It has to be the interest, the rails now, like Infinix or Jumper, or like they set the rails so user can do it more simply, but there still needs to be something that creates the why, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. We've hit a saturation of adults who live in their parents' basement and smash the keyboard out. Like those guys, we've got covered. Like they're my brothers, and we've got them. They're all onboarded, right?
Yeah.
The people. The most important thing that you said was the people that don't know they're on crypto rails. They suddenly benefit. Remittance that you can do without having to pay $27 and wait 2 days. Disintermediating basically the entire FX market. Those kind of things where you get the benefits of being on chain, but you don't realize that you're on chain because You don't have to deal with public keys and private key architecture. You don't have to deal with gas or bridging or any of those weird nuances. You don't have to find RPCs to execute on your orders quicker than everybody else. Like, you just like, oh, okay, this is the platform. This is the new foreign exchange platform, or this is the new Revolut, or this is the new app that gets me to my end zone quicker. And actually, it's considerably cheaper, and it's actually better and faster than what came before it. You don't know that it's running on Ethereum or on Solana. You don't actually care.
Yep.
That's how you onboard an entire new subset of user, because these people, mom and dad they don't care.
Yeah, I
They
mean,
don't care.
when they actually go and buy something on Binance, they're just buying crypto, right? So
Spot on,
technically, ideally, we want to get to a state where we're building a platform where if anyone wants to buy crypto or do anything with crypto, they don't have to actually know about the chain, which is where I want to go into like your definition, because you have a very specific definition for chain abstraction and the UX there.
I do. So I think there was maybe 6 or 7 months ago. So, first of all, chain abstraction as an idea has been popular for around a year. It first really started getting its sort of traction as a narrative actually around ETH Denver last year. There was an event, Frontier Research and Near, these guys did a lot of work around this, and they pushed this a lot. I think some months after that, there was a split in mindshare where, and I actually didn't even realize this until recently, until I started talking to people more about it, but there's a split in how people actually understood chain abstraction as a narrative. And this went undetected for some time because the two camps here are kind of saying the same thing, but they're not at the same time. And so camp A is saying chain abstraction is actually the abstraction of all on-chain complexity. So it is, as you guys mentioned, the ability to create apps that are suitable for Web2 users where you don't even know that you're on-chain. So that's how one camp people define chain abstraction. I have actually never thought about chain abstraction in that sense. I've always thought about chain abstraction much more narrowly as chain abstraction is not an abstraction of all on-chain complexity, but is rather specifically addressing a very distinct problem in this space, which is that users have to manage balances for every chain that they have assets on, and they need to manually bridge between those chains. And so the abstraction here is the abstraction of what chains you have assets on and needing to move between them. It is the consolidation of all of your balances into one on-chain experience. That doesn't get you all the way to the point of having an app that is suitable for like a normie, right? That's one part of it that is super important, of course, that kind of helps create that Binance-like experience. But there's a lot of other parts of creating that experience that I wouldn't consider to be attached to chain abstraction at all, like account abstraction and gas abstraction, these things. I don't consider that a part of chain abstraction for the most part, unless it contributes to the removal of needing to, like, for example, have ETH and Sol and these different things, then you can kind of stretch it. But
that's also just a part of it, right? Like,
so kind of. So to take a step back, the definition that I provide for chain abstraction generally is a user experience exempt from the manual processes required to interact with multiple chains. So it's a user experience that is, that has nothing to do with having to bridge funds between chains, having to manage balances on different distinct chains, and part of that can be having to manage gas tokens for these chains. But it's anything related to chain-specific asset management or anything that requires you to cognitively understand I'm on Base or I'm going to Polygon or these different things. That is a problem that chain abstraction is solving, which is a part of this larger thing that you guys are talking about, which is like, I don't even have a nice name for it. It's just, it's like creating consumer apps, right? So consumer apps, the end state of that is chain abstraction plus account abstraction plus social logins plus these different things. But it's a part of that. It is not that whole thing encapsulated, right? So I think even, I forget who it was, somebody from Layer Zero, they said, chain abstraction is just account abstraction, but a different name. And I was like,
And I always thought of so for me it was like chain abstraction sits on top, and then underneath, like categories of it are gas abstraction, account abstraction, balance abstraction, and that they together form the model for chain abstraction. Then anyone can come and build any type of seamless flow on top, right? And like how you sign, how you authenticate is also part of your interaction with the chain, pretty much, right?
Sometimes, yeah.
The final version of what you're talking about is you abstract the chains themselves, but not really everything else.
Yeah, so with chain abstraction as a definition, it is exclusively the abstraction of distinct chains. So not necessarily abstraction of like the fact that you're using a blockchain, but it's the abstraction of different distinct chains. So you might still know that you're on chain, but just not, you don't need to be aware of I'm on Base versus Avalanche versus Solana or whatever. And things like account abstraction, like these things help with that, like that end experience that we just talked about. But account abstraction is not a subcomponent of chain abstraction. It helps with chain abstraction. It can help enable chain abstraction technologically, but account abstraction has a lot of benefits that are not tied to fixing multi-chain complexity, right? So like, is social recovery like a part of chain abstraction? Not at all. I think it's a totally different thing that can help this type of like consumer app experience, of course, be realized, but it is not chain abstraction. So the reason why we define chain abstraction narrowly as solving a very distinct problem of multi-chain complexity and the necessity to manage multiple distinct chains. It's because if you attach too broad of a definition to it, then that problem becomes overcrowded with the other things that we're working on. And in my opinion, that problem is one of the most important things that have not been solved in Web3 yet. And the fact that we still expect users to manage balances for every chain is
retarded.
if not,
Retarded. It's
if
fine.
maybe the
We're all
biggest,
friends here.
like user experience failure that we've had collectively as an industry ever. And so I think it's important that chain abstraction is defined narrowly attached to that, such that we can really focus on that problem. And then that can flow into, creating like on-chain Binance, right? So people have asked me like, what is the end state of all this? Okay, well, it's Binance, it's Coinbase, but you don't want that to be off-chain. You want that to be on-chain and decentralized. But chain abstraction is a part of that, and it is not the representation of all of that together. It is.
I don't disagree. Like, there's one counterpoint I would do, like the fail on the balance side and how we show it. Realistically, in the past year, maybe, from an Interop perspective, we came to a point where this is actually a solvable problem, whereas 2021, it was theoretically, but then you would integrate a bridge, just shit, does it work? And it takes 25 minutes or 45, or it says 45, but it's 3 hours. As an app developer, you basically don't really have a system that will work in 98% uptime or 98% cases. So it's new pieces of Interop infra that allowed for this to actually flourish, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So on the basis of your definition, anything that's multi-chain and then you kind of abstract the complexity, that's chain abstraction, right?
So I'm glad that you asked that question, because part of what I did in my talk yesterday was, what's the difference between cross-chain and chain abstraction? So how do you know, okay, this is just a cross-chain solution, this is just a chain abstraction solution? The difference is a very simple question that you ask to the, whenever you're using this front end, which is, do I need to select an origin chain? If the answer is yes, it's cross-chain. And now, cross-chain is not bad at all. I love cross-chain. I'm not knocking cross-chain at all. I think cross-chain has been amazing, and it's made massive evolution, especially in things like Jumper, things like Bungee over the past few years. But that's not chain abstraction. And so what is chain abstraction? It's if you don't have to select an origin chain. You just select an origin token.
We're adding another layer after the other to actually justify the first definition.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, so I came to this secondary qualification of chain abstraction because I would kind of consider that to be a clarification on the first definition, which is, okay, it's exempt from the manual processes attached to using multiple chains. The main manual process that's attached to using multiple chains is the need to be cognitively aware of origin chain. And so if you remove that, it's qualifying as chain abstraction, in my opinion. So the removal of an origin chain, or at least the need to select an origin chain, implies a lot to user experience. It means that if I don't need to select an origin chain, then I'm doing automatic bridging, essentially, which I did this tweet. I said, chain abstraction is basically automated bridging, and people were upset about that. But you're doing automated bridging. A lot of time you're doing gas abstraction, these different things that are attached to the fact that I'm just selecting that I want to go to this app and I want to spend my ETH, and that ETH can come from X number of origin chains. And at that point, whenever you don't need to select an origin chain, you've effectively abstracted distinct chains from an end user, and now they don't need to pay attention to it. Now you come on to the next question, which is chain abstraction is risk abstraction. Okay, if you just have one balance, and how do you know if you're holding balances on chains that are unsafe, right? So this is the big thing. I think I had Anoma ask me about this, and there was a whole talk at DEF CON that was, shitting on chain abstraction because it's risk abstraction.
I think what's good about your understanding is that you're very vocal about it, right? So if someone actually disagrees with you, they can always do that.
Right.
But what I want to actually hear from both of you is that I know his stance on chain abstraction, but then chain abstraction is being used for different purposes in different contexts. So would you describe Jumper and Infinix as chain abstracted apps, or do you actually agree with his definition and say that, okay, we're not chain abstraction?
No, in the context of his definition of chain abstraction, Jumper is not a chain abstracted app, nor do I necessarily agree with the definition of the chain abstraction. For me, it is wider because the industry uses it as wider. And yes, one player can set up what the opinion on it is, but we also had interoperability trilemmas and a lot of different industry-wide problems that they just looked at from different sides. And I think that's perfectly fair because that kind of implies different design choices, more choices for users. I guess the second question is how we approach chain abstraction, or
Yeah, I mean, so let's say if people want to like position a project into different buckets, right?
Yeah.
So I know from his stance that, okay, if this is the definition, Universal X is chain abstraction. But then I would not put Jumper and Infinix in that bracket because, like he said, there's like an origin chain, you have to actually bridge funds.
So for me, Infinix would be a chain abstracted app. Jumper would not.
Okay.
Right. Jumper basically has all of the selection for the user that they possibly can have when interacting with the blockchain and a wallet. That nothing's obfuscated, nothing's opinionated for them. They can do whatever they want. A lot of that is abstracted in Infinix, which then, like, I would categorize it as a chain abstracted app, right?
Yeah, the next evolution for us would be that you just pick your asset and pick your destination, and we'll take care of the rest for you. Whether we take it from Base, Arbitrum, Optimism, for you, it doesn't matter. And for us, we're just trying to get you the best execution, the best route, the best price, whatever it may be. That is, but in your definition, we still wouldn't fall under that category because in that one small instance, that would be the same category, but actually we abstract away from the gas. We abstract away from the bridge. We abstract away from the liquidity profile. All of that is encapsulated in what we would call chain abstracted. But I think you have a really purist take on it. Like if you're chain abstracting, then it's got to be the thing that you're actually doing is abstracting away from chains, and everything else is kind of moot.
One thing, like, have you done any analysis on, like, if you both at the moment presuming running like centralized solvers to front the liquidity?
Yeah, I mean we don't do that. We just plug into aggregators.
They
Okay.
also use Li-Fi.
Yeah, and I know they do, but like Particle does as well.
We use the centralized. So we plug into Li-Fi specifically for the definition
Fallbacks
swap. So whenever you're like buying a token on Solana, or not Solana, but mostly I think we use Li-Fi for our EVM chain. So whenever you buy a token on like Base, that swap quote to buy the token is what we're executing. But the liquidity fronting we actually handle internally, and we are using a centralized solver to do that internally.
So the question would then be, from a single chain like abstracted point of view, right? The user has more tokens, more whatever, and if you have this, like for example, you're fronting the liquidity, and you are choosing for a user what tokens to do. So technically speaking, you can optimize the routes in a way where, like,
For sure, yeah.
you know, at any given time, take the best kind of combination that works to get the best pricing.
And actually, eventually, it will just be what asset do you want? And we will actually pick what to sell for you on your behalf because there are better routes, there's better liquidity. When you don't have a constraint on time and get me into this thing, you can make really smart decisions about routing. You can have multiple hops. You can go from one blockchain to another blockchain. If you want to go from BTC to Trump on Solana, how do you actually do that? The way that you do it through Infinix is by multiple resources and multiple aggregators, as well as bridges. But for the user, just buy me Trump. The only asset that I have is Bitcoin in the wallet. Buy me Trump. We turn that Bitcoin into USDC. We bridge it. We then put it into we use a DEX in order to be able to create a quote, and then you execute on that quote. But the user just presses one button and it's done.
I mean, the experience that you guys just described is an incredible experience, and this is exactly why I 80% of my waking hours are spent like trying to bullpost chain abstraction and talk about why it's important, because like I think when you broaden it too wide, you lose that experience that we just talked about, which is okay, the fact that you can have routes for multiple different tokens to buy a destination token, or from multiple different chains, or choose whatever chain that the user has funds on that is the most efficient to do that transaction. That's a killer user experience. That's what we've been trying to like get people to build and get people to adopt for so long. And so like these definitions, I think basically what happened is that you have two camps of projects that both define it differently. So we define it the same as One Balance defines it, and the same as Arcana and Octo, and Egor defines it pretty similarly to the way that we do. And this is kind of like that part of projects that define it as specifically solving the problem I just talked about. The other camp of projects that define it differently is I think sometimes Jumper and Infinix and these different you guys have kind of defined it more broadly. Zion has defined it more broadly like that as you guys have. I've seen you have what's the trading app. I'm blanking on the name. There's Slingshot. I think these guys they kind of have a chain abstracted balance a little bit, but they've also defined it more broadly as like they've called themselves chain abstracted, and I would consider it to be a pretty primitive.
Can I ask you a question? Why is it so important for you to get the definition right?
Because I think that if you define things as chain abstraction that aren't contributing to that experience that I mentioned, then it makes it harder for people to understand really what the problem solved here is. And so as a developer or as a user, if I want to go use a chain abstracted app and I go and use application A and it's just cross-chain, and then I go and use application B, which is what I would consider to be real chain abstraction, then what's chain abstraction? I mean, I don't know is it just like the fact that, okay, I use social logins and gas abstraction to use this app? Or is it the fact that this app didn't make me, like, this app was totally abstracted from distinct chains? And so if we can keep that narrower, it makes it much easier to build out this narrative and to actually solve this problem, get developers on board, get some, existing users on board, when there's no confusion around where does chain abstraction start, where does it end? And so I've been very vocal. My entire talk at Polymer's event was actually dedicated around what is chain abstraction, what is not chain abstraction, and why have we defined it differently over the past few years, or few months. And I don't think it was ever done intentionally, the fact that it was defined differently. I think that it was just because both of the ideas, consumer ready apps, right, and like distinct chain abstraction, these are all the same goals basically, which is, we need to fix fragmentation, we need to make user experience better. And so when you're communicating that, it's like, yeah, we all agree, but hold on, take a step back, we don't actually, because those might achieve the same thing on some level, but they're not actually the same experiences. And so
it's because you're selling your product based on the definition of the name.
We actually don't use chain abstraction in our product tagline or anything like this.
But like there is no product. There's Tabasco, right?
Don't
get me wrong. There's a product, but the Tabasco overshines the particle side, right?
A little bit, yeah, because I talk about this user experience a lot, right. And it's the reason that I define it that way is not because I want to position ourselves, but it's because this is the problem that we're solving, that One Balance and Arcana is solving, and I think that that's the problem that is defined by chain abstraction. Right. And I think anything else is too broad.
I have a question for both of you. So, do you think using chain abstraction is a negative or a positive connotation for project for the current user base? Let's call them like native users. I can kind of start. So for me, it's actually a really confusing type of thing, right? Because it should cater to the normies, the ones that don't understand, but then we're saying chain abstracted, and so it immediately implies that they already need to know that there's a chain that was removed, type of thing, right? Like implies a lot more knowledge. So the naming of it is actually very much catered to the existing crowd, and predominantly this existing crowd still likes choices.
Yeah,
right.
I think that because you're struggling to define, to convince people that your definition is correct, I think just by sheer virtue, if people are confused, it's probably the wrong marketing message to go out and be like, we're chain abstracted. Because if it was really well known as to what the guidelines are and what the barriers are, like, are you an L1 or an L2? People get their heads around that. Are you a smart contract blockchain or not? Are you just a normal crypto?
Or EVM or not?
Exactly.
Right.
Because those are hard lines that are defined, that's a really easy way to position yourself. This whole are you chain abstracted? Are you cross chain? And because the jury's still out on you've got a very fair point, but I think people use it in a different way, and that's why it's confusing.
Yeah, I think I would say that most projects, at least that are in the chain abstraction vertical, use it in the traditional definition, which is the way that I described it. Especially projects that are exclusively doing chain abstraction. So us and One Balance, we're kind of competitors with One Balance, but we're pretty close with them and their team, and I show them all the time. They define it the same thing as we do because they're solving the same problem that we are, which is multi-chain complexity. Arcana, same thing. I think they're competitors, but they're building a killer product, and I always recommend people to go use it because they're solving that problem. And so they generally define it the way that we do. Now, I don't think that chain abstraction should ever be used to describe something to users. Chain abstraction is a term for the infra guys and for developers. The product can be chain abstracted, but it should never be named chain abstraction because, like you mentioned, this is a term that doesn't mean anything for most users. Now,
exactly, yeah.
It should mean something for us. We should be able to know what chain abstraction is, and ideally, really what I want is people to agree on what chain abstraction is. And so this is why I'm so incessant on Twitter, because I want there to be some unanimous agreement such that we can, because really the best end goal for chain abstraction is that every on-chain app is chain agnostic, or it doesn't require you to select an origin chain, and is from a user perspective basically all the exact same apps. Because with users, I actually was before this, I was at the event being run by the Rollup, and I heard Bernd Banksy talk about this, and he said users don't want to do anything that they aren't already used to in Web2, which I totally agree with. Mm-hmm. They want to do things that they are familiar with, and managing chains is not one of those things. And so every app should be chain agnostic and should be chain abstracted. And so I define it that way because that's the goal that I really want. And I think if you can define it narrowly, then now everybody's aligned on a very specific goal, which is that, okay, we all need to be chain agnostic. And, that's all I want. That's what I want people to do.
I think it's pretty early days as well. So it's you have a product, that's why you have one opinion. Then some other guy who is also trying to establish himself.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Technically, by that definition, Jumper actually is chain abstracted because we're fully chain agnostic since launch. Not
That's the
opinionated.
problem, though.
But now we're looking at how do you define chain agnostic? So chain agnostic chain agnostic is another way that I would define the abstraction of origin, right? Because you're agnostic to the distinct chain that you're using.
Yeah, but like I can say we're agnostic to what chains we're going to support and offer to the users.
Yeah,
right?
but as a user, I need to select. I need to choose a religion whenever I'm on.
Not necessarily.
Jumper.
Like the way the funnels work is user is usually sent to an app or to buy a specific token. If they're not using centralized exchange, they're navigated to a chain if it's a native token or whatever chain the token exists on if it's not a native token, right? So
How
it's
about
still-
if like the user just wants to borrow against their assets?
if
So
you
like-
have the normal funnel that it currently is, I have money on this chain, I'll go find a protocol on this chain that
Yeah.
supports it, right?
Yeah. I guess the my end zone would be I've got Ethereum. I want to borrow against Ethereum.
Find me the
Do
best
I,
yield.
do I care if it's Aave, Morpho, whatever chain it's on? Probably not.
I mean, I think that's also one of the problems because like all the Interop protocols started with the same goal. And if you look 3 years ago, we would describe the same thing as Interop, right? Like being able to actually buy anything from any chain as this end goal for Interop protocols and the kind of UX that we would unlock. But now 3 years later, the Interop layer has become the infra layer. And then the UX experience has become like the chain abstraction part of it. So it's interesting, but like that's why we keep having problems because people define the same thing with different terms. And the problem with that is like as new players come in, they try to position themselves in different
It's
sectors,
also really
which is what-
beneficial to like do your own words, right?
Yeah, yeah, I
Like,
mean,
do
yeah,
your
yeah,
own
of
he's
course,
also
definitions,
struggling with
right?
in a way.
So
Yeah.
let me ask you two a question. My theory is we'll have thousands more chains over the next couple of years. What's the end goal of multi-chains? Where do you think we land? Do we have, I'll give you the two scenarios. In 10 years' time, do we have 1,000 chains that people use or like 5?
Depends on if things are chain abstracted, I guess. I mean, so this comes down to where do developers want to build their apps? Now, this is a kind of a downstream effect of what we just talked about. But if a user has to select an origin chain, then now users are loyal to distinct ecosystems. They need to be aware of what ecosystems that they're using. And what happens whenever this is the case is that we have 5 chains that dominate everything. That's how it is today. We have Base and Solana and whatever, BNB chain and Avalanche. And because users are going to congregate around places because they are constantly aware of what chains they're using. And so if you remove that, all of a sudden now developers can deploy anywhere on app chains, on niche L2s or whatever, on big chains if they want to. But the only reason why they would deploy in one place over another is exclusively because that's what services their app better over another chain. It's not, is there users on this chain? Does this chain have a good brand? This is actually eliminated because now users are not aware of these chains. And so if that happens, and now all of a sudden developers can deploy wherever they want, I do think that we're going to have 1,000 chains because like why wouldn't, like there's going to be a lot of developers that are going to deploy app chains. Why don't developers deploy app chains in larger quantities today? Because it's not as easy as deploying on Solana because you have access to users and liquidity right now.
I do think there's going to be like many more app chains because, for example, someone like Aave would want to have their own chain, right? But then there's also a benefit of being part of one ecosystem. Like if you're a smaller app, how do you get distribution, right? Solana actually solves for a lot of those problems, and then Base solves it in a different way. So distribution is pretty important as well.
I would agree with 1,000 chains. Just the caveat to it would be that it's a hybrid system where you have 5, 10 to 15 to 20 that are like super opinionated and super specific, and then a lot of obfuscated ones that are more maybe infra. Like for today's world, it would be the abstract versus like I don't know, OP as a home for superchain. Right, where they're working on other chains getting prominence. Abstract is super opinionated and like wants different user groups, different type of UX, different type of style, what people are going to do there. And so I think we're going to have a proliferation of a lot of chains that serve the infra needs, but what the users are going to like see and know is going to be much narrower. It's almost like we don't know how many, like we know there's cables and under the Atlantic Ocean, we're Google, but you don't know how many and shit. Like there's like a few narrow things you're going to know through UI and maybe even have an attachment to a chain because of the specific opinion that they made, but in general, pretty obfuscated.
Is
What
that,
do you think?
I think the most retarded option is usually going to be the one that wins, and you're going to have one chain per person and their own token. But
that would be the obfuscated one then, right?
Yeah.
If it's that many.
yeah, so you need more of a OP model than you do building your own L1. Like I don't think we need any more L1s because we can barely sell the block space that we have right now. You might want to run your own chain for some weird reason. Maybe you're a stablecoin network and you want to pay for gas and stables. Maybe you're Aave and you want super fast transaction speeds between getting in and out of vaults or something like that. Fair enough. Like you're going to have individual use cases, whether it's AppLay or something else. The question is like, we as an industry, do we encourage that and let it happen, or like the meme coin fiasco that's going around right now, we have a way to self-police. We have a way that we can tell people, actually, this is probably not what you should be doing. Developers, pick your poison, but actually you should really just go towards these 5 because they'll service all of your needs.
You're basically like like, this is my hard disagree, at least on the latter part, which is basically gatekeeping in a way by how we think it should be done versus allowing the tech to like flourish in a design space and the winner to win.
No,
right? From like a market perspective type of thing. Sorry, I agree with the policing part in a way, from like educate your friends not to like do stupid shit.
Right,
like, you
that's
know,
exactly
like
what I was getting
hop
at.
for a token and stuff. But like from a design space, like building apps, infra, it should be like really go for it. Like
it should be competitive advantage to build rather than you're doing it out of you're doing it out just because everybody else is.
Yeah.
So like we did this with ICOs. Like you guys remember when ICOs first came in, there was like hardly any of them, and then all within a 4-month period there was thousands of ICOs, and we got to the point where it was PvP, winner take all.
Same
most
with
of
meme
them
coins
were
now, right?
Most of them were rugs, and exactly the same cycle with meme coins. But we found a way to police ourselves. We were like, actually, it's probably a bad idea to just invest in every single ICO, and the moment it launches, everyone just starts dumping. Like, it's probably not what we should be doing. And actually, they haven't made a comeback for that. We found a new mechanism. We found airdrops. We found node sales and distributions, whatever. That's the way that I think meme coins are going. People look at it and they say, okay, well, I think we've had enough of pump.fun rug pulls, I think.
I think that they found their staple. It's just that they're going to be less used as a gambling financial instrument. I think there's a lot that we don't like understand about like tokenized attention, and it has probably a shit ton of implications and applications in like today's world where like everybody's glued to their screen.
Yeah.
I just don't think we figured out like what's the like financial and incentive model behind it. So it's not PvP, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so considering that all of the 3 products here kind of cater to the speculation trading market in a way, because that's also like crypto's most used use
Whoa.
case.
That's the PMF aside from stable coins.
It's true.
There's art.
Sure. I mean, I can see your art collection later, but that's why. Well, so in this world where a lot of us are actually just building for this one use case, that is 99% of the volume, how do we differentiate between these 3 applications? How does one win in the long term over the other, or actually just all 3 coexist? How do you see it playing out?
I think all 3 can coexist.
Yeah,
So I'm working in this industry and at this company because I do believe we're all pushing towards growing this pie, right? The implication of every decision is this industry will be larger. There will be more users, and we're all building towards it. And like the self-policing part, like there's a lot of good people in the industry that are doing the same, right? And so, I don't think it's a one winner takes all. I do think that what we differ largely is the user acquisition strategies. And like after that, like how do you retain them? For Jumper, this is the loyalty pass, ecosystem campaigns. We figured out how to basically be the middleman for the ecosystems to get them TVL and users while the users get rewarded. It's a win-win-win scenario basically. For I guess like, you can talk more about it, but like UX, ease of access, like new token launches. So like again, serving different needs of a user. And I think at this point, with the 99.9% volume, we share the users. So they would do still specific actions with Infinix, use Jumper with their other EOA, use the Universal as well. I think there's a lot of overlap between the users themselves.
I think that if all of our final mission is that we want to become the best shit peddling casino, that's like to me that's a failed mission. That's like it services the narrative right now, and it services a cold market, which people are speculative and they'll gamble. But you have to believe in more than that if you want to operate in the space. You have to believe that like blockchain actually solves real problems. And I always get crucified for going back to the fundamentals because I've been wrong for a year and a half. But if the only thing that you want to do and the only thing that you think that crypto is good for is this weird casino speculative mania, then like actually I'm in the wrong place, because that's not why I'm here. That's not why I presume everyone at Infinix is here. You have to be building for something bigger and better. Otherwise, you're just going to get steamrolled by people who are truly PvP and truly value extractive. There are really great, knowledgeable, very impressive builders in the space that are trying to solve real world problems. And at some point in time, the market dynamics will shift. When a new buyer comes in, whether it's Wall Street or someone just more sophisticated, and they say, actually, it's cute that you can trade cat coins and make some money, but this stuff that you're building, this core infrastructure, actually that's really interesting, because in 10 years' time, the cat coin's going to go away. In 10 years' time, this thing will be real. And for us, you have to service a market, because crypto right now, as you said, the narrative is to make money. The narrative is you try and find things that are...
I agree with you. And I think one of the reasons of our venturing out is not actually us as an industry or us as builders. It's the roadblocks by going outside. It's kind of like we're in a closed gym and we have chains around the doors, and like bit by bit, these chains are coming down, but you have a global industry with a global market, global users basically, with super fragmented regulatory aspects of like, how do you actually venture out? Like, how do we offer better products than banks if we're gate kept out of like systems that could offer that to the users, right?
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So
and we're only 15 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's early days. Like the market moves so rapidly. Every 6 months we have a new narrative. It literally is. In a bull market, it's every 6 months. You start with meme coins, you go to AI. In the previous market, you had NFTs. It was insane. Every 6 months, there was something new that came along that spurred the market to build. And that's the true definition. It's like, how can you inspire builders to think that this is a good place to come and spend time? And if you can keep doing that, that's why crypto grows. If you can keep doing that, you bring really, really smart people into the ecosystem, and they build prediction markets. Yeah. They build something new and novel that hasn't existed yet. Hyperliquids, yeah.
Yeah. I want non-financial applications. I mean,
yeah.
We build a trading app, of course, but I mean, like for me personally,
but you have to service the market, and the market wants trading, so
right.
You have to service that market. If you try to do something really abstracted and like really different to what people are asking for, it's just hard for you, because you're going to have to wait for your users. You're going to have to wait for your 100 dedicated users to come and test, and actually it'll take a really long time.
Right.
So what do? You service your market, and then that's spot on.
Yeah. That's like, I guess, like the question we're all having, or not anymore, when meme coins create, like how much attention and engineering work do you like put into it now, right? And it's also like, in a way, at least for us, it was a very almost like ideological decision as well. Like, do we want to go like overboard with this? Like, because it is also in a way like voucher support towards the, like, yes, we're selling shovels, but also like
Yep.
It's just the way that the market works right now. And so,
sure.
and especially for us, we got to a point where we never wanted to build a trading app. It was actually not a part of our plans at all. Like, we didn't want to get into the space. We didn't want to like really even be we never wanted to be an app even. Like, so we're an infrastructure provider, right? But we got to a point where we built universal accounts back in September, and we finished it. And we said, okay, how do we get adoption for this now? How do we get people to build with this? And so there's two paths. You either just like launch SDKs and hope that people adopt it, or you target the market and you answer what the kind of what people want, and you build something that gets people's attention and that actually shows what you're building. And then, like, to be honest, Universal X has been our best developer marketing tool that I could have ever asked for. It's like brought in hundreds of developers that we would have never had.
Jumper
because
started the same
preach to the choir. The only caveat we did was like hitting Twitter early on, right? Like Arjun and I getting a different voice outside of the formal tone of Li.F that worked pretty well.
But honestly, like, it's great that all of us cannot actually agree on one definition, because then we build different types of solutions for the same problem, which is to actually grow crypto, right, eventually. So I like the fact that all of us have different approaches here, and you're very opinionated about the chain abstraction stuff. You're opinionated about, in general, building the super app with all the different use cases, and you're catering to like today's market. People want to bridge from one chain.
I'm opinionated about not being opinionated.
Yes. So I think that's a good way to like wrap it up in a way that, okay, we're all building for the same goal to grow crypto, and all of us have different ways to get there.
Yep. Thanks for having us. Thanks. Enjoy the conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it was good to meet you in person.
Yes, good to sit down.
I would like both Infinix and Jumper to be chain abstracted one day, but
By his
you know.
definition.
by my
We
definition.
are. We're getting there. We're
So
getting there.
I know you guys have been working on it
So
for a while.
this is the thing as well. For us specifically, right? The UI that you get to, with an intention to bridge somewhere, get an asset. I think like we're a long ways away until we make the shift towards like don't select the source chain.
Right.
But then you have the ecosystem campaigns where this should be a given. Right? Because if I'm using a swap product, my intention is to like get another asset, and a lot of times I want to select. Maybe I'm like exiting something, like rotating it in something else, versus an action I want to do, meaning like deposit into a pool, participate in something where this becomes less
I mean,
important.
but I do
overall.
think the one balance trend will probably pick up quicker than that. Like if people actually get used to their balance being shown as like one account across 6 CVM chains, like that's a trend that can actually pick up.
You might love this. We're trying to get to a stage where you just say what you want, and the app does the rest.
Like a generative AI, like
Natural language into transactions.
I mean, in tech.
Eventually, eventually maybe yes, but we want to stick away from that kind of AI agent.
Okay.
But it will be like, I want to earn yield from my cash,
yeah,
and then the platform says, okay, you have USDC, USDT spread across all of these different things. If you moved it all onto Athena and USDE and we staked it for you, you could earn 11%. And you would literally just finger tap that, and it would go and then do all of that on your behalf. So that's the, I wouldn't even say that's the holy grail. It's just a feature. It's just a feature that services one particular market. Power users, like the guys that really want exposure to specific chains and specific assets, they'll have no interest in that because they already know. They already know. It just caters to one type of user. That would be, what do you call that? That's like blockchain abstracted.
yeah. I mean, I think there's some people call that if it's using natural language, it's what DeFi AI or whatever.
DeFi AI, guys.
I honestly think for most protocols, the best marketing they can do is stay away from the buzzwords.
Yeah, we don't.
Because it catches you so fucking fast.
Yeah.
Like you're in the narrative, and all of a sudden the narrative turns against
Look
you.
at AI.
Right,
Literally a multi-
AI, whatever it is.
People like think pieces go up.
And I like this like
You mean
simple.
a perpetual asynchronous ZK rollup is not, that doesn't mean anything to anyone?
That's the whole
That's the holy grail, yeah.